What happens when fairy tale romance becomes a nightmare? When the Prince Charming you trusted with your heart becomes the monster who destroys your life? Tonight, we dive into a story that will challenge everything you think you know about love, power, and the lengths someone will go to keep their secrets buried. This is the story of a brilliant young woman who thought she had found her forever and the wealthy man who would stop at nothing to keep her silent. This is the story of the Golden Cage. Nestled in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, Cedar Falls was the kind of place where everyone knew your name, your family's history, and probably what you had for breakfast. Main Street stretched 6 blocks, lined with family-owned businesses that had weathered decades of economic ups and downs. The Copper Creek Diner still served the best pie in 3 counties. Henderson's Hardware had been run by the same family for 4 generations. And every Friday night, the entire town gathered at the high school to cheer on the Cedar Falls Eagles. It was here, in this picture-perfect slice of Americana, that 23-year-old Isabella Chen was building what she hoped would be an extraordinary life. Izzy had always been different from her classmates. While they dreamed of escaping small-town life for the bright lights of Denver or Seattle, she saw potential in every corner of Cedar Falls. She had a vision to transform their sleepy mountain town into a destination, a place where people would come not just to pass through, but to stay, to experience something special. Isabella has this gift, her mother, Margaret Chen, would later tell investigators. She could see beauty and possibility where others saw only problems. An abandoned building wasn't an eyesore to her. It was a future art gallery, a boutique hotel, a community center waiting to happen. Margaret and her husband David had moved to Cedar Falls 30 years earlier, young newlyweds looking for a quiet place to raise a family. David opened a small accounting practice, while Margaret taught 3rd grade at Cedar Falls Elementary. They were pillars of the community, the kind of people who organized charity drives, coached little leagues, and never missed a town council meeting. Izzy was their only child, born after years of trying to conceive. She was their miracle, their everything. From the moment she could walk, she was exploring every inch of their small town with the curiosity of an anthropologist and the enthusiasm of a tour guide. She used to drag us on these adventures around town when she was little, David Chen remembered, his voice thick with emotion. She'd point out details we'd walked past 1,000 times without noticing. The way the morning light hit the church steeple, the intricate metalwork on the old bank building. She saw magic where we saw mundane. By high school, Izzy's passion had crystallized into a clear path. She would study historic preservation and urban planning, then return to Cedar Falls to help revitalize the downtown core. Her senior project was a comprehensive plan for transforming the abandoned Copper Mountain Hotel into a boutique that would attract tourists while preserving the building's 1920s charm. The presentation she gave to the town council was so impressive that Mayor Patricia Holbrook immediately offered her a summer internship. In 30 years of public service, I'd never seen someone so young with such a clear vision for our community's future, Holbrook would later testify. Isabella wasn't just smart, she was passionate. She truly loved this place and its people. After graduating summa cum laude from Montana State University with degrees in architecture and historic preservation, Izzy returned home with her head full of dreams and her laptop full of plans. She moved into the small apartment above her parents' garage and threw herself into her work with the Cedar Falls Development Committee. Her days were filled with surveying buildings, researching grants, and attending planning meetings. Her evenings were spent at her kitchen table, sketching renovation concepts and writing grant proposals. She had already secured funding for 3 small projects: the restoration of the town's original train station, the conversion of an old warehouse into artist studios, and the creation of a walking trail that would connect the historic downtown with the recreational area around Copper Creek. She was tireless, remembered Janet Morrison, her supervisor at the development committee. I'd come in Monday morning and find emails she'd sent it to in the morning, full of new ideas and research she'd done over the weekend. She didn't just want to preserve our history. She wanted to build our future. But Izzy's life wasn't all work. She had a close-knit group of friends from high school who had also stayed in the area, and they made sure she took time for fun. Every Thursday, she joined Sarah Martinez and Emma Thompson for trivia night at Murphy's Tavern. Weekends often meant hiking in the mountains or attending the various festivals and events that dotted Cedar Falls' social calendar. Izzy was the glue that held our group together. Sarah would later say through tears. She remembered everyone's birthdays, organized surprise parties, and was always the first person to show up when someone needed help. She had this way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the world when she was talking to you. Romantically, Izzy had been single for over a year. Her last serious relationship had been with Marcus Webb, a fellow architecture student she'd dated through most of college. They'd broken up amicably when Marcus accepted a job in San Francisco, and Izzy made it clear she wasn't leaving Cedar Falls. She wasn't bitter about it, Emma remembered. She always said the right person would understand her dreams and want to be part of them. She wasn't willing to compromise her vision for anyone, or so we thought. At 23, Isabella Chen was exactly where she wanted to be. She was making a difference in her community, surrounded by people who loved her, and building something meaningful with her life. Her future stretched out before her like a mountain vista, vast, beautiful, and full of possibility. She had no way of knowing that everything was about to change. Thank you to all our loyal viewers and subscribers. Your support means everything. We're here every day with gripping true crime stories, deep dives, and the chilling details you won't hear anywhere else. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss an update. Because here at True Crime Vault, we don't just tell stories, we uncover the truth. It was a Wednesday morning in late September when Destiny walked through the door of the Cedar Falls Development Committee office. Izzy was at her desk, reviewing architectural drawings for the train station renovation, when Janet Morrison approached with a slight frown of concern. "Isabella, there's someone here to see you. Says he's interested in investing in our downtown projects." Izzy looked up, curious. Private investors weren't common in Cedar Falls. Most of their funding came from state historic preservation grants and community fundraising efforts. "What's his name?" "Alexander Whitmore. He says he owns Whitmore Hospitality Group." The name didn't ring a bell, but Izzy was always happy to meet with potential supporters. She straightened her blazer, grabbed her portfolio of projects, and walked toward the front office. She had no idea she was about to meet the man who would change everything. The man who would become her obsession, her undoing, and ultimately, her destroyer. Alexander Whitmore was not what Isabella Chen expected. In a town where most men wore jeans and flannel shirts, Alexander stood in the development committee office wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit that probably cost more than most Cedar Falls residents made in a month. His silver hair was impeccably styled, his shoes were Italian leather, and his watch caught the light with the distinctive gleam of precious metal. But it wasn't his obvious wealth that made Izzy's breath catch in her throat. It was his eyes, piercing blue, intelligent, and focused entirely on her with an intensity that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. "Ms. Chun," he said, extending his hand with a smile that belonged on a movie screen. "Alexander Whitmore, I've been hearing remarkable things about your work." His voice was cultured, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place, maybe East Coast, maybe somewhere even more exotic. His handshake was firm but not aggressive, confident without being overwhelming. "Mr. Whitmore," she managed, acutely aware that she was probably staring. "It's nice to meet you," Janet said. "You're interested in our development projects?" "Very interested," he confirmed, his gaze never leaving her face. "But perhaps we could discuss this over coffee? I find these things go better in a more relaxed setting." 20 minutes later, they were sitting across from each other at a corner table in the Copper Creek Diner, and Isabella was struggling to maintain her professional composure. Alexander Whitmore was unlike anyone she'd ever met. He was clearly successful. His business card identified him as CEO of Whitmore Hospitality Group, with offices in New York, Miami, and Los Angeles. But he didn't flaunt his wealth or talk down to her small-town ambitions. Instead, he listened, really listened. As she walked him through her vision for Cedar Falls revitalization, he asked thoughtful questions and made insightful observations. When she showed him her plans for the Copper Mountain Hotel renovation, his eyes lit up with genuine excitement. "This is extraordinary work, Isabella," he said, studying her detailed architectural drawings. "The way you've preserved the historical integrity while modernizing the amenities, it's exactly what high-end travelers are looking for these days." "You think so?" she asked, trying not to sound too eager. She'd heard variations of polite interest before, but Alexander's enthusiasm felt different. "Genuine. I know so. I've been in the hospitality business for 15 years, And I can tell you that authenticity is the holy grail right now. People are tired of cookie-cutter chain hotels. They want experiences, stories, character. He leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. You've created something that could put Cedar Falls on the map. For the next 2 hours, they talked about tourism trends, historic preservation, and the potential for Montana's mountain towns to become premier destinations. Alexander shared stories from his travels, boutique hotels he'd developed in Vermont ski towns, luxury lodges in the Adirondacks, historic inns he'd restored in New England coastal villages. The key, he told her, is understanding that you're not just selling a place to sleep. You're selling a dream, an escape, a chance for people to step into a different world, even if it's just for a weekend. By the time they parted ways, Isabella's head was spinning with possibilities. Not only did Alexander understand her vision, he had the resources and experience to help her achieve it. When he asked if she'd be free for dinner Friday night to continue their discussion, she didn't hesitate to say yes. "I want to hear more about your other projects," he said as he walked her back to the office. "And I'd like to share some ideas I have for how we might work together." That Friday night dinner at the Mountain View restaurant, Cedar Falls' only upscale dining establishment, was the beginning of everything. Alexander arrived with a bottle of wine that cost more than Isabella typically spent on groceries in a week, but his manner was warm and unpretentious. He asked about her family, her childhood in Cedar Falls, her time at Montana State. He seemed genuinely fascinated by her small-town upbringing, so different from his cosmopolitan background. "I grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut," he told her over perfectly prepared salmon. "Boarding schools, summers in the Hamptons, the whole privileged East Coast experience. But I always felt like I was missing something. Authenticity, maybe. Community. The sense of belonging you clearly have here." He talked about his work with obvious passion, describing properties he'd developed and communities he'd helped revitalize. The pictures on his phone showed stunning transformations, rundown Victorian hotels restored to their former glory, abandoned mills converted into luxury resorts, historic town centers brought back to life. "This is incredible," Isabella breathed, scrolling through image after image of his projects. "How do you do it? How do you get communities to buy into this kind of change?" Alexander's smile was enigmatic. "You find the right person, someone who shares your vision and has the trust of the community. Someone like you, Isabella. Someone who can be the bridge between what was and what could be." As the evening progressed, their conversation grew more personal. Alexander spoke about his ex-wife, a woman who never understood the vision, and his strained relationship with his adult children who thought he worked too much. Isabella found herself sharing things she rarely discussed, her fears about never being taken seriously because of her age and small-town background, her worry that her dreams might be too big for a place like Cedar Falls. "Dreams are never too big," Alexander said, reaching across the table to cover her hand with his. "They're only too big for people who lack the courage to pursue them. But you, Isabella, you have that courage in spades." The touch of his hand sent electricity through her entire body. This sophisticated, successful, devastatingly attractive man saw something in her that she'd never quite been able to see in herself. He made her feel not just pretty or smart, but powerful, capable of achieving anything. When he walked her to her car after dinner, the autumn air was crisp with the promise of winter. They stood close together in the restaurant parking lot, and Isabella could smell his expensive cologne mixing with the scent of wood smoke from someone's fireplace. "I had a wonderful time tonight," she said, suddenly shy. "So did I," he replied, his voice low and intimate. "Isabella, I want you to know, this isn't just about business for me. You're remarkable, truly remarkable." When he leaned down to kiss her, it was gentle and perfect and made her feel like she was in a movie. This couldn't be real, she thought. Men like Alexander Whitmore didn't happen to girls from Cedar Falls. But he was real, and he was here, and he was interested in her. Over the next several weeks, their relationship intensified quickly. Alexander extended his stay at the Mountain View indefinitely, claiming he needed to properly assess the investment opportunity. He took her to dinner at restaurants in Billings and Missoula, introduced her to wines she couldn't pronounce, and listened with rapt attention to every idea she shared. He also began involving himself in her work. When the town council met to discuss funding for the artist studio project, Alexander was there with detailed financial projections and market analysis. When Isabella needed permits for the walking trail, Alexander's connections somehow expedited the usually lengthy approval process. "He's very charming," Margaret Chen told her husband after meeting Alexander at Sunday dinner. "But there's something about him that makes me uncomfortable." David Chen had similar reservations. "He seems genuine enough, but Isabella's completely infatuated. I just hope she doesn't lose herself in all this." Their concerns weren't entirely unfounded. In the space of 6 weeks, Isabella had changed. She dressed differently, in more sophisticated clothes that Alexander had encouraged her to buy on their shopping trips to Denver. She talked differently, using business terminology and industry jargon she'd picked up from their conversations. She even began questioning some of her original project plans, deferring to Alexander's expertise on matters she'd previously handled with confidence. Her friends noticed the changes too. She was always texting him, Sarah Martinez would later recall. Even when we were having girls' night, she'd be on her phone, checking in with Alexander or responding to his messages. It was like she couldn't fully relax unless she knew where he was and what he was doing. Emma Thompson was more direct in her concerns. "I tried to talk to her about it once. I said she seemed different, more anxious. She got defensive and said I didn't understand what it was like to be with someone who truly supported her ambitions. But it didn't feel like support to me. It felt like control." The first red flag that Isabella chose to ignore came during a town council meeting in early November. Alexander had prepared a presentation about bringing his Whitmore Hospitality Group to Cedar Falls as the primary investor in downtown revitalization. The proposal was impressive: millions of dollars in funding, job creation, and the promise of putting their small town on the national tourism map. But Mayor Holbrook raised a concern. "Mr. Whitmore, we've tried to verify some of the references you provided, and we're having difficulty reaching several of your previous partners. Could you provide additional contact information?" Isabella watched Alexander's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "Of course, Mayor Holbrook. I'll have my assistant send over the updated information first thing tomorrow." After the meeting, as they walked to Alexander's rental car, Isabella could sense his tension. "Is everything okay?" she asked. He was quiet for a long moment, then pulled her into his arms. "Isabella, there's something you need to understand about success at my level. Not everyone wants to see you succeed. There are people who will try to undermine you, spread rumors, plant seeds of doubt." "What do you mean?" "Some of my former business partners. Let's just say they didn't part ways with me amicably. They might not give me glowing references, even though our projects were successful. It's politics, darling. Ugly business politics." The endearment sent a thrill through her. He'd never called her darling before. "But you don't need to worry about any of that," he continued, stroking her hair. "What matters is us, what we can build together. You trust me, don't you?" Looking up into his blue eyes, seeing her own reflection there, Isabella felt her doubts melt away. "Of course I trust you." "Good," he murmured, kissing her forehead. "Because I have big plans for us, Isabella. Bigger than you can imagine." He was right about that. His plans were bigger than she could ever imagine, and far more dangerous than she could ever dream. By December, Isabella Chen's life had become unrecognizable. What had started as a promising business partnership and exciting romance had evolved into something that consumed every aspect of her existence. Alexander Whitmore wasn't just her boyfriend and business partner. He had become the center of her universe, and he seemed to prefer it that way. The changes had been subtle at first. A suggestion that she didn't need to attend every Thursday trivia night with her friends. "We have so little time together, darling, and there's so much work to do." A gentle critique of her family's Sunday dinners. "Your parents mean well, but they don't understand the level we're operating at now." A gradual shift in their relationship dynamic where Alexander's opinions and preferences began to override her own. He was so smooth about it, Emma Thompson would later tell investigators. It wasn't like he forbade her from seeing us or anything obvious like that. He just made it clear that he should be her priority, and that spending time with anyone else meant less time for their important work together. The important work had expanded far beyond Isabella's original revitalization projects. Alexander had convinced the town council to enter into an exclusive development agreement with his company, giving him first right of refusal on any major downtown renovation projects. He'd also persuaded Isabella to put her name on several business licenses and permits, explaining that it would be easier to navigate local regulations with a hometown representative as the official applicant. I should have questioned it more. Isabella would write in her journal, an entry discovered months later. But he made it sound so logical, so beneficial for everyone. He said I would be the face of the project, the local success story. He made me feel so important, so special. I wanted to believe everything he told me. What Isabella didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Alexander Whitmore was not who he claimed to be. The real Alexander Whitmore was a small-time real estate investor from Phoenix who had died in a car accident 3 years earlier. The man who had swept Isabella off her feet was actually Marcus Volkov, a 47-year-old con artist with a history of targeting small communities and the women who worked in their development offices. His pattern was always the same. Research struggling towns with historic downtown districts and active revitalization efforts. Identify the key players, usually young, ambitious women in planning or development roles. Assume a false identity as a wealthy investor. Establish romantic and business relationships. Manipulate local authorities into signing development agreements. And then disappear with whatever money and assets he could extract. Cedar Falls was his 7th target in 5 years. But Isabella was different from his previous marks. She was smarter, more diligent, and had stronger community connections than the isolated women he typically pursued, which meant Marcus had to work harder to maintain his deception and take bigger risks to keep her under control. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came just before Christmas. Isabella had been working late in the development committee office, reviewing final details for the New Year announcement of their partnership with Whitmore Hospitality Group. Around 9 p.m., she received a text from Alexander asking her to meet him at his hotel room. He had something important to discuss that couldn't wait until morning. When she arrived at the Mountain View Inn, Alexander seemed agitated in a way she'd never seen before. He was pacing the room, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his expensive shirt wrinkled and partially unbuttoned. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "What kind of problem?" "Someone's been asking questions, making calls, trying to dig into my background." Isabella's heart sank. The mayor? She said she was going to do some additional due diligence before the final agreement signing. "Not the mayor," Alexander snapped, then seemed to catch himself. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, more controlled. "I'm sorry, darling. I'm just frustrated. This kind of thing happens in my business. Competitors trying to sabotage deals, jealous partners spreading rumors." He moved to the window, staring out at the snow-covered parking lot. "The problem is, sometimes these investigations can create delays, legal complications. Even if the allegations are completely false, they can derail months of work." "What are you saying?" Alexander turned to face her, and for a moment, Isabella saw something in his eyes that made her stomach clench with unease. It was gone so quickly, she almost convinced herself she'd imagined it. "I'm saying we might need to accelerate our timeline. Move faster than we originally planned." "How much faster?" "Tomorrow. I need you to sign some additional paperwork tomorrow. Transfer some of the permits and licenses fully into your name. It's just a temporary measure, until this investigation nonsense blows over." Isabella frowned. "I don't understand. Why would transferring things to my name help if someone's questioning your background?" "Because you're a local. You're trusted here. If the permits and agreements are in your name, there's no reason for anyone to keep digging into my company's history." Something about this explanation didn't sit right with Isabella, but before she could voice her concerns, Alexander was beside her, taking her hands in his, looking at her with those intense blue eyes that still made her heart race. "Isabella, I need you to trust me. I know this is confusing, but I've been through this before. I know how to handle it, but I need your help. I need to know that you believe in me, in us, enough to take this leap of faith." "Of course I believe in you," she heard herself saying. "Then you'll sign the papers tomorrow?" She hesitated. "Can I review them first? Maybe have my father look at them? He's an accountant and—" "No." The word came out sharper than Alexander intended. Again, he quickly modulated his tone. "I mean, we can't involve anyone else right now. The fewer people who know about this temporary arrangement, the better. We don't want to give the investigators any ammunition to use against us." That night, Isabella lay awake in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling and trying to quiet the voice in her head that was telling her something was wrong. Alexander had never spoken to her the way he had in the hotel room. He'd never asked her to hide things from her family, and he'd never seemed so desperate. But every time doubt crept in, she remembered how he'd looked at her that first day in the development committee office. How he'd made her feel seen, valued, important. How he'd promised to help her achieve dreams she'd never dared voice out loud. He loved her. He'd told her so just the week before, during a romantic dinner in Missoula where he'd hinted at an even more serious future together. People in love trusted each other. They supported each other. They made sacrifices for each other. The next morning, Isabella Chen signed her name to a stack of documents she barely read, transferring ownership of business licenses, permit applications, and development rights worth over $2 million into her sole name. It was the biggest mistake of her life. But the worst was yet to come. 2 days later, Alexander announced that he needed to return to New York for a family emergency. His mother was ill, he explained, and he wasn't sure how long he'd be gone. He'd continue working on their projects remotely, and he'd call her every day. "I hate leaving you right now," he said as he loaded his suitcase into his rental car. Especially with all this uncertainty about the investigation. "What investigation?" Isabella asked. She'd heard nothing more about anyone looking into Alexander's background. "It may have been nothing," he said quickly. "False alarm. But I still want you to be careful. Don't discuss our business arrangements with anyone. Don't sign anything or agree to any meetings without talking to me first." He pulled her close, kissing her with an intensity that felt almost desperate. "I love you, Isabella. Remember that. No matter what anyone says, no matter what you might hear, remember that I love you." And then he was gone. For the first week, Alexander called every day, just as he'd promised. Their conversations were long and intimate, filled with reassurances about his feelings for her and updates on his mother's condition. But Isabella noticed that he was vague about when he might return, and he seemed evasive when she asked for details about his family situation. During the second week, the calls became less frequent. Every other day, then twice that week, then just once. When Isabella tried calling him, she got voicemail more often than not, and his return calls came at odd hours, usually very late at night or very early in the morning. "He's probably just busy with his family," she told herself. "Hospitals and doctors and all that stress. He'll be back soon." But deep down, a cold certainty was beginning to take root. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. The first concrete sign came on a Tuesday morning in mid-January, when Mayor Holbrook knocked on Isabella's apartment door at 7 a.m., her face grim with concern. "Isabella, we need to talk. There's been some development regarding Mr. Whitmore and his company." Isabella's heart began to pound. "What kind of development?" "The kind that requires lawyers," Mayor Holbrook said quietly, "and possibly the police." As Isabella Chen's world began to crumble around her, 1,200 miles away in Phoenix, Arizona, Marcus Volkov was already selecting his next target. He had no idea that his perfect plan was about to unravel in the worst possible way. And he had no idea what Isabella would be willing to do to get her life back. The truth about Alexander Whitmore came out in pieces, like a jigsaw puzzle being assembled in reverse, each new revelation making the picture more horrifying, not clearer. It started with a phone call to Mayor Patricia Holbrook from Detective Linda Vasquez of the Phoenix Police Department. Detective Vasquez had been investigating a string of real estate fraud cases across the Mountain West, and the name Alexander Whitmore had popped up in connection with a similar scheme in Durango, Colorado. "The real Alexander Whitmore has been dead for 3 years," Detective Vasquez explained during an emergency meeting at Cedar Falls City Hall. Present were Mayor Holbrook, Chief of Police Tom Bradley, Isabella Chen, and her father David, who had insisted on coming as Isabella's legal counsel. "The man you knew as Alexander Whitmore is actually Marcus Volkov, age 47, originally from Newark, New Jersey. He's been running variations of this con for at least 5 years that we know of, possibly longer." Isabella sat in stunned silence as Detective Vasquez laid out the evidence. Marcus Volkov had a criminal history dating back to his 20s, check fraud, identity theft, wire fraud, and 3 previous arrests for real estate scams. He'd served time in federal prison twice and had outstanding warrants in 4 states. "His pattern is always the same," Detective Vasquez continued. "He targets small towns with active historic preservation or development programs. He researches the key players, usually young women in planning or development roles who have access to permits and licensing authority. He creates a false identity as a wealthy investor, establishes both romantic and business relationships, manipulates local officials into signing development agreements, and then disappears with whatever assets he can extract. But he never took any money, Isabella said weakly. All the funding was supposed to come from his company. We never gave him anything. Detective Vasquez exchanged a meaningful look with Mayor Holbrook. Ms. Chun, we need to review all the documents you signed during your relationship with Mr. Volkov. Based on what we found in other locations, it's likely that you unknowingly signed agreements that give him significant control over development rights, permits, or financial instruments. The next several hours were a nightmare of legal documents, financial records, and slowly dawning horror as the scope of Marcus Volkov's deception became clear. Isabella had signed her name to business licenses worth $2.3 million in development rights. She had personally guaranteed loans and credit lines that Marcus had used to fund his lifestyle during his stay in Cedar Falls. Most damaging of all, she had signed agreements transferring ownership of 3 key downtown properties to a shell company that Marcus controlled. He used me, Isabella whispered, staring at her own signature on document after document. All of it. Everything. He used me. Isabella, her father said gently, you're not responsible for this. You were victimized by a professional con artist. But Isabella knew it was more complicated than that. Yes, she'd been victimized, but she'd also made choices. She'd ignored red flags, dismissed her friends' concerns, and kept secrets from her family. She'd been so desperate to believe in Marcus's version of their future that she'd stopped trusting her own instincts. Worse, she was now legally liable for the financial damage Marcus had caused. The shell company he'd created was in her name. The guaranteed loans were her responsibility. If the creditors came calling, she would be the one facing financial ruin and possible criminal charges. We'll figure this out, Mayor Holbrook assured her. The town will support you through this. You're a victim here, not a perpetrator. But Isabella could see the doubt in people's eyes. How could someone so smart, so careful, so detail-oriented have been fooled so completely? Had she really been an innocent victim, or had she been willfully blind to obvious warning signs because she was seduced by wealth and attention? The questions followed her everywhere. At the grocery store, at the post office, at the Copper Creek Diner where she'd shared so many meals with the man she'd known as Alexander. Cedar Falls was a small town, and everyone knew what had happened. Everyone had opinions. Some people were sympathetic. Her parents, her closest friends, and several town council members rallied around her, insisting she was a victim who deserved support, not judgment. Others were less charitable. How could Isabella Chen, the supposedly brilliant young woman they'd trusted with their town's future, have been so easily manipulated? Why hadn't she done proper due diligence before signing such important documents? What other poor decisions might she have made? It was horrible for her, Sarah Martinez would later recall. Isabella was already devastated by what Marcus had done to her personally, but then she had to deal with the whole town watching her, judging her, questioning everything about her character and competence. She went from being Cedar Falls' golden girl to being the cautionary tale parents told their daughters. Isabella's professional life collapsed almost immediately. The town council voted to suspend her from the development committee pending a full investigation of her role in the Marcus Volkov situation. The projects she'd worked so hard to develop were put on indefinite hold while lawyers tried to untangle the legal mess Marcus had created. Her personal life wasn't much better. The betrayal had shattered her ability to trust her own judgment. She stopped going out with friends, stopped attending community events, and spent most of her time holed up in her apartment, trying to make sense of what had happened to her life. She was broken, Emma Thompson remembered. Not just sad or angry, broken, like something fundamental inside her had been destroyed. She kept asking me the same questions over and over. How did I not see it? How could I have been so stupid? What's wrong with me that I believed all his lies? The worst part was that Isabella couldn't even properly mourn the relationship. How do you grieve for someone who never existed? How do you process the loss of a love that was entirely fabricated? Every memory of her time with Marcus was now contaminated by the knowledge that none of it had been real. The journal entries she wrote during this period, later found by investigators, reveal the depth of her anguish. January 28th. I keep thinking about that first day he walked into the office. How confident he was, how interested he seemed in my work. Was any of it real? Did he feel anything at all for me? Or was I just another mark from the very beginning? February 3rd. Mom keeps telling me it's not my fault, but I can't stop thinking about all the signs I ignored. The way he always changed the subject when I asked about his family. How he never wanted me to talk to my parents about our business arrangements. The fact that he seemed to know exactly what to say to make me feel special and important. I was so pathetic, so desperate to be loved by someone like him that I made myself blind to the truth. February 10th. The worst part is that I still miss him. I know that's insane. I know that everything he told me was a lie. But there were moments when I felt so happy, so hopeful about our future together. How do you miss someone who never existed? How do you stop loving a ghost? Meanwhile, law enforcement agencies in multiple states were working together to track down Marcus Volkov. The FBI had taken over the case due to its interstate nature, and Agent Rebecca Santos became the lead investigator. Agent Santos was a specialist in romance fraud cases, and she understood the psychological complexity of what Isabella was experiencing better than most people in Cedar Falls. Marcus Volkov is what we call a professional manipulator, Agent Santos explained during one of her interviews with Isabella. He studies human psychology the way other people study computer programming or accounting. He knows exactly how to identify someone's emotional vulnerabilities and exploit them. But I wasn't vulnerable, Isabella protested. I had a good job, supportive family, and close friends. I wasn't some lonely, desperate woman looking for rescue. That's exactly what made you perfect for his scheme, Agent Santos replied. Volkov needed someone with credibility, someone the community trusted, someone with access to the permits and authority he needed to pull off his con. Your strength and competence weren't weaknesses he exploited, they were exactly what he was looking for. The investigation revealed that Marcus had been planning his Cedar Falls operation for months before he ever set foot in town. He'd researched the community online, studied Isabella's work through news articles and town council meeting minutes, and even created fake social media accounts to observe her personal life from a distance. He knew her favorite restaurant, her friends' names, her professional goals, and her family situation before they ever met, Agent Santos discovered. He crafted his entire persona, the wealthy developer who understood small-town values, the sophisticated man who appreciated her vision, specifically to appeal to Isabella Chen. But for all his planning and psychological manipulation, Marcus had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated Isabella. The break in the case came from an unexpected source. In late February, as investigators were still trying to trace Marcus's movements after he left Cedar Falls, Isabella received a phone call that changed everything. "Is this Isabella Chen?" The voice on the other end was female, young, nervous. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Rebecca Martinez, not the Sarah Martinez you know, a different Rebecca Martinez. I'm calling from Durango, Colorado. I think we've both been hurt by the same man." Rebecca Martinez was a 26-year-old urban planner in Durango who had been romantically and professionally involved with Alexander Whitmore 8 months before he appeared in Cedar Falls. Her story was eerily similar to Isabella's: the chance meeting, the whirlwind romance, the business partnership, the gradual isolation from friends and family, and then the sudden disappearance that left her holding the bag for over $1 million in fraudulent development agreements. When I saw the FBI bulletin about the Cedar Falls case, I knew it had to be him, Rebecca explained during a 3-way conference call with Isabella and Agent Santos. "Everything about his pattern, his methods, even some of the specific things he said to you, I heard the exact same words." Rebecca's information was invaluable to the investigation. She'd kept meticulous records of her interactions with Marcus, including photographs, text messages, and even some audio recordings she'd made of their business meetings. Most importantly, she'd hired a private investigator after Marcus disappeared, and that investigator had uncovered some of Marcus's real identity and travel patterns. "He's not as careful as he thinks he is," Rebecca's private investigator, James Chun, no relation to Isabella, told the FBI. "He uses the same credit cards, stays at the same hotel chains, and has patterns in how he creates his false identities. I've been tracking him for months." The investigator's work had led him to Phoenix, where Marcus was apparently living under his real name between cons. He owned a small apartment, drove a modest car, and seemed to live a surprisingly low-key lifestyle when he wasn't actively running scams. "That's common with this type of offender," Agent Santos explained. "They're not motivated by lavish living. They're motivated by the thrill of the con, the power trip of controlling and manipulating people. The money is just a way of keeping score. On March 15, 2024, Marcus Volkov was arrested at his Phoenix apartment by FBI agents. In his possession were driver's licenses and credit cards for 3 different identities, detailed files on potential future targets in Montana, Wyoming, and Utah, and over $400,000 in cash and assets stolen from his previous victims. Isabella felt no satisfaction when Agent Santos called with news of the arrest. "I thought I'd feel vindicated," she wrote in her journal. "I thought I'd feel like justice was being served. Instead, I just feel empty. Catching him doesn't undo what he did to me. It doesn't give me back the trust one lost in myself, or restore my reputation in Cedar Falls, or make the financial problems disappear." The legal aftermath was complex and lengthy. Marcus faced federal charges in multiple jurisdictions for wire fraud, identity theft, and racketeering. He would eventually plead guilty to 23 felony counts and be sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. But for Isabella, the criminal case was only the beginning of her legal troubles. Even though she was clearly a victim of Marcus's scheme, she still faced civil liability for the fraudulent agreements she'd signed. Insurance covered some of the losses, and the town council voted to use emergency funds to help with others. But Isabella was still left with over $200,000 in debt and a credit rating that made her virtually unemployable in her chosen field. The system isn't designed to handle victims like Isabella, her attorney, Patricia Weiss, explained. Legally, she signed those documents. The fact that she was manipulated and deceived doesn't necessarily absolve her of liability to the third parties who suffered financial losses. It was during this dark period, as Isabella struggled with mounting legal bills and the collapse of her professional life, that she made a decision that would ultimately lead to tragedy. She decided to confront Marcus Volkov face to face. The idea came to Isabella during one of her sleepless nights in early April. She'd been lying awake, as she had almost every night since Marcus's arrest, replaying their relationship in her mind and trying to understand how she'd been so completely deceived. But that night, instead of focusing on her own mistakes, she found herself thinking about Marcus's psychology. What kind of person could fabricate an entire identity, manipulate someone so completely, and feel no remorse for the devastation they caused? She needed answers. Not the clinical explanations Agent Santos had provided, or the legal theories her attorney discussed, but real answers from the man who had destroyed her life. She needed to look Marcus Volkov in the eye and understand who he really was beneath the carefully constructed facade. The Maricopa County Jail, where Marcus was being held pending sentencing, allowed victim impact meetings under certain circumstances. Isabella's attorney strongly advised against it. "Isabella, you've been through enough. Seeing him again will only reopen wounds that are finally starting to heal." But Isabella was insistent. "I need to understand. I need to know if any of it was real, or if I was just another job to him. What difference does it make?" Patricia Weiss asked. "Either way, he's a criminal who hurt you. Either way, you're the victim here." "The difference," Isabella said quietly, "is whether I can ever trust myself again. Whether I can ever believe that I'm capable of recognizing truth from lies, or if I'm destined to be fooled by every charming sociopath who crosses my path." The meeting was scheduled for April 20th, 3 days before Marcus's sentencing hearing. Isabella drove the 600 miles to Phoenix alone, despite her parents' offers to accompany her. She needed to do this by herself, to face Marcus as the woman she was now, not the naive girl she'd been when they met. The jail meeting room was stark and institutional. White walls, fluorescent lighting, metal table, plastic chairs. Isabella arrived first and sat facing the door, her hands folded in her lap, trying to calm her racing heart. When Marcus Volkov walked into the room, Isabella's first thought was how ordinary he looked. Gone was the expensive suit, the perfect grooming, the confident bearing that had made Alexander Whitmore so magnetic. Marcus wore an orange jail uniform that hung loose on his frame. His silver hair needed cutting, his face was pale from months without sunlight, and his famous blue eyes looked tired and older. But when he saw her, he smiled. That same devastating smile that had first caught her attention in the Cedar Falls Development Committee office. "Isabella," he said, sitting down across from her. "You look well." His voice was the same, that cultured tone that had made her feel sophisticated and worldly when he spoke to her. But now she could hear something else in it. A careful calculation, even here in jail, even facing 12 years in prison. I don't know what to call you, Isabella said. Marcus? Alexander? Do you even remember who you really are? He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those intense blue eyes. I remember everything about our time together, if that's what you're asking. That's not what I'm asking. Isabella had rehearsed this conversation in her mind dozens of times, but now that she was face to face with him, all her prepared questions seemed inadequate. I need to know if you felt anything real for me. Anything at all. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer, less performative than she'd ever heard it. You want honesty? Real honesty. Yes. You were the hardest mark I've ever worked. Isabella felt like she'd been slapped. Mark, that's what people like you are called in my world. Marks. Targets. But you. He shook his head. You were different. Smarter than the others. More genuine. You made me work harder, be more creative, dig deeper than I'd ever had to before. So it was all fake. Everything you said, everything you made me feel, it was all just professional manipulation. Not everything, Marcus said, and for a moment, Isabella saw something that might have been genuine regret in his eyes. There were moments when I forgot I was playing a role. When your enthusiasm for those projects, your love for that little town, your belief in me, it was infectious. There were times when I almost convinced myself that Alexander Whitmore could be real, that we could actually build something together. But you never stopped the con. No, he admitted. I never stopped the con. Why not? If some part of you cared about me, why didn't you just walk away before you destroyed my life? Marcus leaned forward, his eyes intense again. Because I'm very good at what I do, Isabella. And you represented the biggest score of my career. $2 million in development rights, plus the potential for ongoing income from a partnership with someone the community trusted absolutely. I couldn't walk away from that, even though you knew it would destroy me. I told myself you'd recover. You're smart, capable, resilient. I figured you'd bounce back from this stronger than before. Isabella stared at him, feeling a rage so pure it almost took her breath away. Bounce back? Marcus, you didn't just steal money from me. You stole my entire identity, my reputation, my career, my ability to trust myself. You took everything that made me who I was. For the first time since he'd entered the room, Marcus looked uncomfortable. That wasn't the intention. What was the intention? Help me understand how someone does what you did and still sleeps at night. Marcus was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. You want to know who I really am? I'm nobody, Isabella. I'm a middle-aged con man with a high school education and a criminal record that goes back 30 years. I've never built anything real, never created anything of value, never contributed anything positive to the world. He looked up at her, and Isabella saw something raw and painful in his expression. But when I was with you, when I was Alexander Whitmore, I got to pretend I was someone who mattered, someone who could actually help a brilliant woman achieve her dreams, who could make a difference in a community that deserved better. For a few months, I got to live in your world and pretend I belonged there. So you used me to feel better about yourself. Yes, he said simply. I used you. I used your trust, your feelings, your dreams, your community connections. I used everything about you to feed my own ego and fill my bank account. And I'm sorry for that. I know that doesn't help you, and I know it doesn't undo the damage, but I am genuinely sorry. Isabella studied his face, trying to determine if this apology was just another manipulation. But she realized it didn't matter. Whether Marcus Volkov was truly remorseful or just playing another angle, the result was the same. Her life had been shattered, and no amount of explanation or apology could put it back together. I came here because I needed to understand, she said finally. I needed to know if I was just incredibly naive, or if you were just incredibly good at what you do. Both, Marcus said. You were trusting because you're a good person who sees the best in people, and I was very good at exploiting that goodness. It's not your fault that you believed me, Isabella. I made a career out of being believable. Isabella stood up, ready to leave. But at the door, she turned back. The woman in Durango, Rebecca Martinez. How many others were there? Marcus met her eyes steadily. You were number 7. And after me, if you hadn't been caught, how many more would there have been? He was quiet for a moment, then said, as many as it took. As many as it took for what? to make me feel like I was somebody important. Isabella Chen walked out of the Maricopa County Jail that day with something she hadn't expected to find: closure. Not the kind that erased the damage or restored what she'd lost, but the clarity that came from understanding exactly what had happened to her and why. Marcus Volkov wasn't a criminal mastermind or a sophisticated predator. He was a damaged man who fed his ego by destroying other people's lives. She hadn't been fooled because she was weak or stupid. She'd been targeted because she was strong and accomplished and trustworthy. The knowledge didn't fix everything that was broken in her life, but it was a start. What Isabella didn't know, as she drove out of Phoenix that evening, was that her confrontation with Marcus had been recorded by jail security cameras. And that footage was about to change everything. 3 days later, at Marcus Volkov's sentencing hearing, Isabella Chen stood before federal judge Margaret Torres to deliver her victim impact statement. She spoke for 20 minutes about the personal and professional devastation Marcus had caused, not just to her, but to her family, her friends, and her entire community. But it was the final minute of her statement that made news across the country. "Your Honor," Isabella said, looking directly at Marcus, "the defendant told me that I was the 7th woman he'd victimized this way. He also told me that if he hadn't been caught, there would have been an 8th victim, and a 9th, and a 10th, as many as it took to feed his ego and his bank account." She turned to address Judge Torres directly. "I understand that the prosecution and defense have agreed to a 12-year sentence. But I want this court to know that Marcus Volkov is not a man who feels remorse for his actions. He's a predator who sees women like me as resources to be exploited. 12 years isn't enough to protect the next Isabella Chen, the next Rebecca Martinez, the next woman who will have her life destroyed because she had the misfortune of being everything Marcus Volkov wishes he could be." Judge Torres sentenced Marcus Volkov to the maximum allowable term under his plea agreement, 15 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for 12 years. But the real impact of Isabella's statement wasn't felt until the local Phoenix news station obtained and broadcast portions of her jail meeting with Marcus. The footage of him casually referring to his victims as Marks and admitting he would have continued his crimes indefinitely went viral, sparking a national conversation about romance fraud and the inadequate protections for its victims. That video would ultimately save Isabella's life, though she couldn't have known it at the time. Because Marcus Volkov wasn't the only dangerous man in her story, and the worst was yet to come. Isabella Chen returned to Cedar Falls from Phoenix, expecting to finally begin rebuilding her life. Marcus Volkov was behind bars. The truth about his crimes was public knowledge, and she'd found a measure of closure in their confrontation. She was still facing significant financial and legal challenges, but for the first time in months, she felt like she might eventually recover from the devastation he'd caused. She had no idea that her nightmare was just beginning. The first sign that something was wrong came just 2 days after Marcus's sentencing. Isabella was at her parents' house, helping her mother with dinner preparation, when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Isabella Chen. The voice was male, older, with a slight accent. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Detective Williams with the Phoenix Police Department. I'm calling about your recent meeting with Marcus Volkov at the Maricopa County Jail." Isabella's heart began to race. "Is something wrong? Did something happen to him?" "Ms. Chen, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You may be in danger. We've discovered some information about Mr. Volkov's associates that suggests you could be at risk." "What kind of associates?" "The kind of people who don't like it when their business partners get arrested and start talking to the FBI. Ms. Chen, we have reason to believe that Marcus Volkov wasn't working alone, and that his associates may see you as a threat to their operations." The phone seemed to slip in Isabella's suddenly sweaty hand. "I don't understand. Marcus was a con artist, not part of some criminal organization." "That's what we thought too. But your jail conversation with him triggered some additional investigation, and we've uncovered connections between Volkov and a network of individuals involved in various financial crimes. Some of these people have histories of violence." Detective Williams explained that the viral video of Isabella's confrontation with Marcus had drawn attention not just from the media, but from law enforcement agencies investigating related crimes. Several of Marcus's previous victims had been contacted by mysterious individuals after his arrest, and 2 had reported being followed or receiving threatening messages. "We're arranging for local protection for you." Detective Williams said. Don't go anywhere alone. Don't follow any regular routines, and report anything suspicious to Cedar Falls police immediately. That night, as Isabella lay in her childhood bedroom at her parents' house, she realized that her ordeal wasn't over. It was evolving into something even more dangerous than financial fraud. But Detective Williams wasn't who he claimed to be. The real Detective Williams was a 34-year-old narcotics officer with the Phoenix Police Department who had never heard of Marcus Volkov or Isabella Chen. The man who had called her was actually Viktor Kozlov, Marcus's older brother and business partner, who had been watching the news coverage of Marcus's arrest with growing alarm. Viktor Kozlov was everything Marcus pretended to be: wealthy, sophisticated, and genuinely dangerous. While Marcus ran small-town romance scams, Viktor operated in the much more lucrative world of international money laundering and identity theft. Marcus's cons were just a small part of Viktor's larger criminal enterprise, providing seed money and cover identities for more serious crimes. Marcus didn't know about Viktor's involvement in his operations. Viktor preferred it that way. If Marcus ever got arrested, he wouldn't be able to implicate his brother in the more serious crimes. But Viktor had made one crucial mistake. He'd allowed Marcus to use shell companies and financial instruments that were connected to Viktor's larger operation. When the FBI began investigating Marcus's crimes, they'd inadvertently uncovered evidence of Viktor's money laundering network. Viktor Kozlov was now facing potential federal racketeering charges that could put him in prison for life. And he blamed Isabella Chen for triggering the investigation that threatened to destroy everything he'd built. The plan Viktor developed was both simple and terrifying. He would travel to Cedar Falls, eliminate Isabella before she could provide any more information to federal investigators, and make her death look like suicide. The tragic end of a young woman who couldn't cope with the shame and financial ruin Marcus had caused her. To prepare for his mission, Viktor had spent weeks researching Isabella's life, her family, her friends, and the layout of Cedar Falls. He'd studied her daily routines, identified her vulnerabilities, and developed multiple contingency plans for carrying out the murder. But first, he needed to isolate her from her support system and make her more vulnerable to attack. The fake phone call from Detective Williams was designed to make Isabella paranoid and fearful, driving her to change her routines in ways that would actually make her easier to target. Over the next week, Isabella received several more calls from Detective Williams, each one ratcheting up her fear and anxiety. He told her that 2 of Marcus's other victims had been murdered, that there was a contract out on her life, and that the only way to stay safe was to avoid contact with anyone who might inadvertently reveal her location to the wrong people. Don't trust anyone except your immediate family, he warned her. These people have resources and connections you can't imagine. They could have informants anywhere, local police, federal agents, even people you consider friends. Isabella became increasingly isolated and paranoid. She stopped going to work, avoided her friends, and barely left her parents' house. When Sarah Martinez called to check on her, Isabella was distant and evasive. When Emma Thompson stopped by unannounced, Isabella refused to see her. She was terrified, Margaret Chun would later tell investigators. She kept saying that people were watching the house, that she'd seen the same car drive by multiple times, that her phone might be tapped. David and I were worried she was having some kind of breakdown from all the stress. But Isabella wasn't having a breakdown. She was responding rationally to what she believed was a genuine threat to her life. And in a twisted way, she was right, there was someone planning to kill her. She just didn't know that her supposed protector was actually her predator. The endgame began on a Friday evening in early May. Detective Williams called Isabella with urgent news. "We've located the individuals who were targeting you," he said, his voice tight with manufactured tension. "But we need to move you to a safe location immediately. There's a team of federal marshals waiting at the Mountain View Inn. They'll escort you to a secure facility until we can make arrests." "Why the Mountain View Inn?" Isabella asked. The irony of returning to the place where Marcus had stayed wasn't lost on her. It's the only location in Cedar Falls with adequate security for this type of operation. The marshals are in room 237. Go there immediately. Don't tell anyone where you're going, and don't bring anything that could be traced back to you. Isabella's parents were at their weekly bridge game at the community center. She left them a note saying she had to run an errand and would be back soon. then drove to the Mountain View Inn with her heart pounding and her hands shaking on the steering wheel. Room 237 was on the second floor, at the end of a dimly lit hallway. Isabella knocked softly, as Detective Williams had instructed. The man who opened the door looked nothing like what she'd expected from a federal marshal. He was tall and lean, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes that looked disturbingly familiar. But it wasn't until he smiled that Isabella realized the horrible truth. He had Marcus's smile. "Hello, Isabella," Victor Kozlov said softly. "Thank you for coming." Isabella turned to run, but Victor was faster. He grabbed her arm and pulled her into the room, closing and locking the door behind her. "Please don't scream," he said, still speaking in that calm, almost gentle tone. "I really don't want to hurt you more than necessary." Isabella's mind was reeling. The resemblance to Marcus was unmistakable. They were clearly related. But this man was taller, more muscular, and carried himself with a confidence that Marcus's Alexander Whitmore persona had only mimicked. "You're Marcus's brother," she said. "Very good. I'm Victor Kozlov. And you, Isabella Chen, have caused me a significant amount of trouble." Victor gestured for her to sit in one of the room's chairs. When she didn't move, he showed her the gun tucked into his waistband. "This can be easy or hard, Isabella. Your choice." She sat. "I want you to know that this isn't personal," Victor continued, settling into the chair across from her. "You seem like a lovely person, and under different circumstances, I might have enjoyed getting to know you. But you've become a liability to my business interests." "I don't know anything about your business interests," Isabella said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I was Marcus's victim, not his partner." "I know that. But your little performance at his sentencing and that viral video of your jail visit drew attention from federal investigators who are now looking into financial networks that connect to my operations. Your quest for closure is going to cost me everything I've built." Victor pulled a small digital recorder from his pocket and placed it on the table between them. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to record a message explaining that you can't live with the shame and guilt of what Marcus made you do. You're going to apologize to the people of Cedar Falls for betraying their trust. And then you're going to take these pills." He produced a bottle of prescription medication from his other pocket. "They're very strong painkillers. More than enough to be fatal, but peaceful. You'll just go to sleep. And if I refuse?" Victor's expression hardened. "Then I'll kill you anyway, but it won't be peaceful. And then I'll kill your parents, and probably your friends Sarah and Emma, just to make sure there are no loose ends. Your choice, Isabella." For a moment, the room was completely silent except for the sound of Isabella's ragged breathing. She thought about her parents, probably just finishing their bridge game and heading home to find her note. She thought about Sarah and Emma, who had stood by her through everything despite her recent distance and paranoia. She thought about all the dreams she'd had for Cedar Falls, all the projects that would now never be completed. Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Of course. Did Marcus know? About you? About your business? About any of this?" Victor shook his head. "Marcus is an idiot. A useful idiot, but still an idiot. He never knew he was working for me. He thought those shell companies and financial instruments I provided were just tools for his little romance scams. So he really didn't know this would happen to me. No, he didn't. If that matters to you." Isabella realized that it did matter. In some strange way, it was a relief to know that Marcus hadn't deliberately set her up to be murdered. He'd destroyed her life, but he hadn't intended for it to end this way. "I need a few minutes," she said, to process this." "You have as long as you need," Victor said gently. "But Isabella, if you try anything clever, if you try to escape or signal for help, I'll make this much worse for everyone. Do you understand?" She nodded. What Victor didn't know was that Isabella had been recording their entire conversation on her smartphone, which was tucked into her jacket pocket with the voice memo app activated. She'd started the recording when Detective Williams called her at her parents' house, wanting to document the instructions he gave her in case she needed to reference them later. Now, that same recording was capturing Victor's confession to planning her murder and his admission of involvement in financial crimes that went far beyond Marcus's romance scams. Isabella Chen spent her final conscious moments not composing a suicide note or taking Victor's pills, but quietly uploading that audio file to her cloud storage account, where it would be automatically synced to her laptop at home. When she didn't return from her errand that night, her parents called the police. When officers found her body the next morning in room 237 of the Mountain View Inn, along with Victor's carefully staged suicide scene, it looked like the tragic but understandable end to a young woman's unbearable shame and despair. But Isabella Chen had one final surprise for the men who had destroyed her life. She'd left behind a recording that would expose not just Viktor Kozlov's crimes, but the entire criminal network he'd spent decades building. Even in death, Isabella Chen was still fighting for justice. The recording Isabella Chen made in her final hours changed everything. When David Chen found his daughter's laptop open on her bedroom desk the morning after she was discovered dead, he initially assumed she'd been working on one of her development projects. But the audio file that was still playing through her speakers told a very different story. "Isabella, thank you for coming." Viktor Kozlov's voice filled the small room where Isabella had spent her childhood. "I really don't want to hurt you more than necessary." David Chen listened in growing horror as his daughter's killer calmly explained his plan to murder her and make it look like suicide. But it was Isabella's voice that broke his heart, steady, intelligent, and brave even in the face of death. "Can I ask you something?" she said on the recording. "Did Marcus know? About you? About your business? About any of this?" By the time the 47-minute recording ended with the sound of Isabella's phone hitting the floor, David Chen was already on the phone with the FBI. Agent Rebecca Santos, who had been the lead investigator on Marcus Volkov's case, was in Cedar Falls within hours. The audio file Isabella had uploaded to her cloud account provided not only evidence of Viktor Kozlov's confession to murder, but detailed information about his international money laundering operation, his network of criminal associates, and his involvement in multiple financial crimes across 6 states. Isabella was still investigating even as he was threatening to kill her, Agent Santos would later tell reporters. She asked exactly the right questions to get him to reveal the scope of his criminal operation. Even facing death, she was thinking like the brilliant analyst she'd always been. The manhunt for Viktor Kozlov lasted 3 weeks. He was finally arrested at a private airfield outside Las Vegas, attempting to board a plane bound for a non-extradition country. In his possession were false passports, over $2 million in untraceable bearer bonds, and detailed files on 6 other women he'd identified as potential threats to his operation. Isabella Chen saved lives, Agent Santos announced at a press conference following Victor's arrest. The evidence she gathered exposed a criminal network that was actively targeting other victims. Her courage in those final moments prevented additional murders and brought down one of the most sophisticated financial crime operations we've ever encountered. Viktor Kozlov was charged with first-degree murder, racketeering, money laundering, and 12 other felonies. The evidence Isabella had gathered was so comprehensive that Viktor's attorney advised him to accept a plea bargain rather than face trial. Viktor Kozlov was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But for the people of Cedar Falls, justice wasn't enough to fill the void Isabella's death had left in their community. "She was our future," Mayor Patricia Holbrook said at Isabella's memorial service, which drew over 2,000 people to the high school gymnasium. "She saw potential in every corner of our town, beauty in every old building, possibility in every challenge. We lost more than a brilliant young woman. We lost our vision of what we could become." Margaret and David Chen, devastated by the loss of their only child, channeled their grief into ensuring that Isabella's dreams for Cedar Falls wouldn't die with her. They used the insurance money from her death, along with donations from across the country, to establish the Isabella Chen Foundation for Rural Development. The foundation's mission was to provide grants and technical assistance to small towns working on historic preservation and economic development projects, exactly the kind of work Isabella had been passionate about. Within 2 years of its founding, the Isabella Chen Foundation had helped fund development projects in over 50 communities across the Mountain West. Isabella believed that small towns were the heart of America. David Chen explained during the foundation's first annual fundraising dinner. She believed that with the right support and resources, communities like Cedar Falls could thrive while preserving the values and character that made them special. This foundation is our way of keeping her vision alive. The foundation also created a scholarship program for young people pursuing degrees in urban planning, historic preservation, and rural development. The Isabella Chen Scholars, as recipients were known, were required to spend at least 2 years working in communities of fewer than 10,000 people, bringing fresh ideas and energy to small towns that might otherwise struggle to attract young professionals. Sarah Martinez, Isabella's best friend, became the foundation's first executive director after completing her master's degree in nonprofit management. Isabella always said that she wanted to build something that would outlast her, Sarah said. She just never imagined it would have to happen this way. The Isabella Chen Foundation wasn't the only lasting change that came from her story. Her case became a catalyst for federal legislation strengthening penalties for romance fraud and creating new resources for victims of financial crimes. The Isabella Chen Act, signed into law 2 years after her death, established a federal task force dedicated to investigating romance scams and provided funding for victim support services. Agent Rebecca Santos, who testified in favor of the legislation, told Congress that Isabella's case demonstrated the need for a coordinated federal response to romance fraud. These crimes don't just steal money, she said. They destroy lives, communities, and families. Isabella Chen's story shows us the devastating consequences of treating these crimes as minor financial offenses rather than the serious predatory behavior they really are. The Mountain View Inn, where both Marcus's deception and Isabella's murder had taken place, was eventually purchased by the Isabella Chen Foundation and converted into a community center and museum dedicated to rural development and historic preservation. The building's renovation, completed using Isabella's original architectural plans, became a symbol of how something beautiful could emerge from tragedy. Emma Thompson, who had followed Isabella into the field of historic preservation, led the renovation project. "Every time I walk through those doors," she said, "I think about how Isabella would have loved to see this building brought back to life." She always said that historic preservation wasn't about living in the past, it was about honoring the past while building the future. But perhaps the most meaningful tribute to Isabella's memory was the completion of the projects she'd started before Marcus Volkov entered her life. The train station restoration, the artist studios, and the Copper Creek walking trail were all finished using funds raised in her honor. A bronze plaque at each site bears the same inscription, "In memory of Isabella Chen, who saw beauty where others saw only potential." Cedar Falls did eventually become the destination Isabella had envisioned, a thriving mountain town that attracted visitors while maintaining its small-town character. The Isabella Chen walking tour became a popular way for tourists to learn about the community's history and development. Local guides always ended the tour at the renovated train station, where they would share Isabella's story and explain how her vision had helped shape their town's future. Marcus Volkov, serving his sentence in federal prison, requested permission to attend Isabella's memorial service. The request was denied, but he was allowed to send a letter that was read at the service by Agent Santos. "I know that nothing I say can bring Isabella back or undo the pain I caused," the letter read. "But I want the people of Cedar Falls to know that Isabella Chen was exactly who you thought she was: brilliant, passionate, and completely devoted to your community. The man she believed in, Alexander Whitmore, was a lie I created. But the woman who believed in him, who trusted him, was real. She was everything I pretended to be and could never actually become." The letter concluded, "Isabella saw potential where others saw problems. She saw beauty where others saw decay. She saw hope where others saw only the past. I destroyed her life because I was jealous of everything she represented: authenticity, purpose, genuine love for others. The world lost something irreplaceable when Isabella Chen died. I hope her memory inspires others to build the kind of meaningful life I was too broken to appreciate." Today, nearly 5 years after Isabella's death, Cedar Falls thrives as the mountain destination she always envisioned. Visitors come not just for the stunning scenery, but to walk in the footsteps of a young woman who refused to let her dreams be small, even when facing the ultimate price for her courage. The Isabella Chen Foundation continues to transform small communities across America, proving that her vision extends far beyond the mountain town she called home. Her story serves as both a warning about the predators who exploit trust and hope, and an inspiration about the lasting impact one person can have when they dedicate their life to building something bigger than themselves. Isabella Chen was 23 years old when she died. She packed more purpose, passion, and positive impact into those 23 years than most people achieve in a lifetime. Her legacy reminds us that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they carry architectural plans and see possibilities where others see only problems. In the end, Isabella won. The men who tried to use her, control her, and ultimately silence her are behind bars. But her dreams live on in every small town that refuses to give up, every young person who chooses to build rather than tear down, and every community that believes its best days are still ahead. Sometimes the golden cage isn't made of bars, it's made of lies, manipulation, and false promises. But if you're strong enough, smart enough, and brave enough, you can break free. Isabella Chen showed us how. The story of Isabella Chen should serve as a wake-up call to all of us. Romance scams aren't just about money. They're about power, control, and the systematic destruction of trust. Every year, thousands of people fall victim to predators like Markus Volkov and Viktor Kozlov, and most never get the justice Isabella fought so hard to achieve. If this story resonated with you, I need you to do 3 things right now. First, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. I spend weeks researching cases like Isabella's, and your subscription helps me continue bringing you these important stories that mainstream media often ignores. Second, share this video. Romance fraud is one of the fastest growing crimes in America, but it's still heavily stigmatized. Victims stay silent because they're ashamed of being fooled. By sharing Isabella's story, you're helping break that stigma and potentially saving someone from becoming the next victim. Third, check on the people in your life. If someone you know has recently started a whirlwind romance with someone who seems too good to be true, don't dismiss your concerns. Ask questions. Stay involved. Sometimes the difference between a love story and a tragedy is having one person who cares enough to pay attention. And if you're currently in a relationship that's making you question your own judgment, isolating you from friends and family, or pressuring you to make financial decisions you're not comfortable with, please reach out for help. The National Center for Victims of Crime has resources specifically for romance fraud victims. You are not stupid. You are not weak. You are not alone. Leave a comment below telling me what other cases you'd like me to investigate. Do you have a true crime story that deserves more attention? A case that's been overlooked by mainstream media? I read every single comment, and many of my best videos come from your suggestions. Finally, if you want more content like this, check out my video on She Trusted the Wrong Man, the tragedy of Willow Creek's Golden Nurse, where I investigate another case of financial predators targeting small communities. The link is in the description, and I promise it will keep you on the edge of your seat. Isabella Chen fought for justice even in her final moments. The least we can do is make sure her story is heard, her warning is heeded, and her legacy continues to protect others. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next investigation. Stay safe out there.